us. In the European Union, which has become the trade affiliate of NATO, plans to ban the broadcast of some other mass media of Russia. The European Commission said to Bloomberg, and we know that this agency distributed disinformation. We also seen and continue to see how it is being used to distribute the leaks designed just for these purposes, who use Bloomberg as a huge place for such information. I cannot say whether it happens or not, and when it will happen, if there are some tangible plans on the table, or if there are some reflections on the plans. To be honest, I don't know. But in case all these hotheads from Brussels, I would like to remind that many journalists from EU countries, dozens of them, enjoy living and working in Russia. I would like to tell you by secret that every time, in response to some other restrictions, when we try to expel them from Russia, they do not want to do so. They are not eager to leave our country because they don't like it only in the articles they are paid for. De facto, they enjoy living in Russia. I understand that this time, if this goes along the same scenario by the European Union, whether by the EU or some individual countries against some journalists, and despite the fact that the Western journalists do not want, but they will be compelled to see on themselves our response. Before that, they felt our love. Now they will be put under pressure. Likewise, to the discrimination of the Russian journalists, our response will be rapid and very painful to the Western mass media. So this will be reflected on their colleagues here. I'm talking about Western journalists. And this is not a threat, even not a warning. This is a state of fact, an inevitable scenario of the evolvements under certain circumstances, which may be planned and organized by the West. That's why we would like to be clear. We got used to double standards of the West, to the absence of any standards on the West. This does not mean that we will put up with them. Inconsistency and political biasness of the Olympic movement turned out that the Olympic movement was in deep crisis against the backdrop of the Olympian movement. The participation of the Russian athletes in a neutral status is pending. An absolute manifold of unscrupulous were revelations of Thomas Bach, who approached the Ukrainians in order to monitor statements of the Russian athletes in the internet and the mass media, in order to identify any comments and reflections that would serve the ground to ban accession to the Olympic Games to the Russian athletes. In fact, this is a criminal statement. This is a logic that contradicts all the documents that regulate the work of Thomas Bach. I'm talking about the plot of the Kiev regime, who encourages nationalism and intolerance. I'm talking about aggressive nationalism and the policy to destroy all the Russian, including with the hands of the International Olympic movement. We are persuaded that by such dishonest actions, illegal and immoral. The International Olympic Committee discredits itself and undermines the Olympic Charter. They discredited themselves once again. They have done this on many occasions, and I believe that this verb has one form. You cannot use it endlessly. I'm talking about not that they once again put in dust, but they destroy the Olympic movement that they have established themselves. The main principle of the fourth Olympic Charter says, and I quote, that the practice of sport is a human right. Every individual must have access to the practice of sport without discrimination of any kind in respect of internationally recognized human rights within the remit of the Olympic Charter. End of quote. In practice, we see that for purely political reasons, some unwanted countries are almost expelled from the international sports. These double standards and politicized approaches of the International Olympic Committee, biased, illegitimate, which contradicts the law, is being shown that within the last decades, the international sport officials put a blind eye on various armed conflicts during the preparation of Winter of Winter Olympics. And I think that they just saw it with one eye, and all the other conflicts, clashes, humanitarian disasters, it seems that they do not notice them. Let me remind you that NATO aggression against Yugoslavia in 1999, military operations of the United States and its allies in Afghanistan in 2001-2021, in Iraq between 2003-2011, and in Syria in 2014, when back then there was an International Olympic Committee. And where is it now in the context of Gaza? We have a lot of questions on the Palestinian-Israeli conflict. At the briefing on the 8th of May, we have made it clear on our situation and our vision on the situation in Gaza. The situation continued to deteriorate. Land operations in Rafah, in the south of the Palestinian enclave, where about 1.5 million civilians live. Every single day, people are dying, including the UN officials. There are no stable supply channels for humanitarian aid to the Gaza citizens. This proves that in this trajectory, the prospect for the diplomatic resolution of and the cessation of hostilities, to which Russia calls since the very first days, are elusive. The only path to end war and to prevent any future confrontation, claiming lives, innocent lives, is to establish the environment conducive to political settlement that should be built on the generally recognized international solutions, first and foremost on the two-state solution, Palestine within the borders of 1967 with the capital in East Jerusalem, and Israel coexisting in peace and security. Just a couple of words on the launch of a global intergovernmental directory on exchange of information, computer incidents and attacks. There was official launch on the 9th of May of this directory. This was an initiative tabled by Russia, agreed by consensus all the United Nations on the OEWC. De facto, I'm talking about the single window service that would allow to the competent authorities to maintain direct contacts if there are incidents in the information space. Such task is to reduce to de-escalate conflicts in the digital environment. This is especially relevant when the Western countries used to replicate some ungrounded accusations against some countries. This megaphone diplomacy we've referred to it on several occasions. This directory, established under the United Nations, is designed to become a channel for a depoliticized interaction of the countries and transform technical information to establish true sources and interrupt malicious activity in the information space. Russia will continue its active participation in improving the directory of contact points, first and foremost through clarifying specific parameters of the information exchange and helping to the developing countries and forming the national groups of response to computer incidents. And I would like to back our Cuban colleagues. On the 30th of April 2022, the embassy of Cuba was attacked with the use of arms. The Cuban diplomatic mission was shelled from the gun AK-47. Luckily, no one was injured, and the mission was damaged. The perpetrator was arrested, and after that, the investigation process ended up only 4 years after, with when the court acquitted the accused. It was decided that at the moment of the crime, the perpetrator was, and I quote, in the state of insanity. He did not control his actions, and that's why he is innocent. It is not the only crime of such crime committed against the Cuban diplomatic mission in Washington. Unfortunately, it is going on amid the escalated U.S. threats against the government of the Island of Liberty. On the 24th of September 2023, 2 Molotov cocktails were thrown at the territory of the Embassy of Cuba. It is telling that the law enforcement has not identified and arrested the perpetrator, and we share the public assessment of our Cuban colleagues. It seems that this notorious American justice system is covering up anyone who commits the crimes against the states who are not welcomed by Washington. This decision of the U.S. court sets a precedent. In fact, it empowers such persons with a license to kill because it leaves them unpunished of any punishment. Moreover, it justifies them. By the way, it spotlighted the gaps in the United States with the respect of the diplomatic immunity, inviolability, and we have paid our attention on that fact in connection to New York, Washington, San Francisco, and Seattle, where our Russian diplomatic missions were functioning before they were illegitimately closed by the U.S. authorities. We can only remind you of the obligation of a host state to ensure security of all diplomatic missions on its territory in line with international obligations. Hopefully, all those sensible people living in the United States will hear us. But we would like, once again, to make it clear to all other Western countries, well, attacks on the Russian diplomatic missions and consular missions and on the diplomats, unfortunately, being carried out regularly, and all the perpetrators, whether are left unidentified or unpunished. But there is good news. Today, on the 15th of May, we celebrate the Day of Family. It was proclaimed by the UN General Assembly Resolution 47237 on September 20th, 1993. The document recognizes that the families as the fundamental unit of the society are an important element of sustainable development at all levels, and that their contribution is crucial to its success. Annual celebrations of this event promotes awareness of issues relating to families, increase the knowledge and social and economic and demographic processes affecting families. The Russian Federation actively backs endeavors of the international community aimed at strengthening the role of family and increasing its social status. Let me remind you that the Constitution of the Russian Federation, which guarantees sovereign protection and support of the family, motherhood, fatherhood, childhood, are overlapping with its international commitments in human rights and children's rights. Paragraph 3, Article 16 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, Paragraph 1, Article 10 of the International Covenant on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights, Article 23 of the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, Preamble of the Convention on the Right of the Child of November 20th, 1989, and many, many others. Since 2014, our country implements the concept of state family policy until 2025. aimed at supporting and protecting the families, preserving traditional family values, increasing the role of family in the life of society, increasing authority of parenthood in the family and in the society, preventing and tackling family problems, improving the lives of families. In line with the presidential decree of November 22, 2023, number 875, the year 2024, the current year, was declared the Year of Family. The plan comprises the following activities: improve the lives of families with children, health program for men and women of reproductive age who have children, strengthening responsible parenthood and family values among youth and children. And yet another important date to our ministry. Today, on the 15th of May, New Style, and this the 3rd of May, Ancient Style. This is 1809. Emperor Alexander I formed Count Romanzov on the establishment under the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and expedition of consular affairs. That is the date of establishment of independent consular services in the system of foreign affairs. Of course, the history of consular relations of our country has started even earlier. Yet in the 16th century, Russia received foreign consuls, and our Russian consuls were sent abroad during the reign of Peter I. Peter I initiated in 1707 the establishment of the first consulate in Amsterdam, then in Venice. This is 1711, in Paris, 1715, and in Vienna, 1718. However, after the establishment of the Expedition of Consular Affairs, the consular services had become an integral part of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. With the approval in 1820 of the first consular statute, the activities of the Russian consular services abroad obtained a legal status. Today, consular missions conduct their works in 215 diplomatic missions in 142 countries of the world. We consistently expand the consular presence. We open up permanent foreign missions, including in the regions with large concentration of our diasporas, as well as popular tourist destinations. The consular activities, as it's said in Article 1 of the Consular Charter, is designed to protect the interests of the Russian Federation, and that the citizens of the Russian Federation and legal entities enjoyed the same rights established by the Constitution of the Russian Federation abroad, as well as general recognized principal norms of international law, international treaties to which the Russian Federation is a party to, the laws of the Russian Federation, the laws of the host state. Of course, we are compelled to state that in recent years, unfriendly actions of the Western states reduced intensity, and in some cases, complete wrap-up of the consular activities and expulsions of our diplomats and closure of our permanent missions. These steps, of course, affected common people who have found it more difficult to achieve passport, notarial instrument, and who are not involved in business, who just leave, move, visit their families, do their work, engaged in some activities to form documents. In the absence of the Russian consulate within a walking distance, affected our friendly foreigners and to all those who not just like Russia, but due to the circumstances, they have to form an entry visa. Right now, it takes a longer time to get visa to travel to Russia. Nevertheless, despite all impediments and hostile activities overtaken by unfriendly regimes in order to complicate the work of Russian foreign missions, the continue to fulfill their duties, support the Russian citizens living abroad. State informatization, flexibility in the work of the citizens, of course, facilitates smooth work of foreign missions in the consular section. Today, you can make an appointment to the consulate and apply for documents online. Mobile consular services are being organized regularly. Now they are planned and organized in the cities when our consular sections were closed. We plan to launch digital services for the Russians living abroad. We successfully implement the project of unified electronic visa for the citizens from 55 states for short-term trips to Russia. We will continue to update the public on the important amendments to the law concerning the current legislation, and we will do so at our website, at the website of the consular section, at our briefings, and so on and so forth, and of course through social networks of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. I would like to congratulate with all my heart our colleagues from the consular section who are engaged right now in this headquarters abroad, who are veterans of the consular services. I would like to congratulate you and wish you health, tolerance, and to you and to your families who are now your brothers and sisters, because this is a real front. What we see right now in the international context, and first and foremost, the circumstances in which the consular officers appeared. And a couple of words on the 4th customary readings that will be held between 22 and 24 of May in the Russian Institute of Pushkin, under the aegis of Commission of the Russian Federation for UNESCO. And the main topic will language and media text. In the framework of the format will include discussions dedicated to the problems of the Russian language and its role in the public life in Russia and foreign states, transformation of the language in the context of technological breakthrough in the past decades. It will engage leading scientists, methodologists, teachers, cultural professionals, publicists, and lovers of the Russian language all across the globe. The program will comprise more than 30 events, including panel discussions, workshops, seminars, conference, session, presentation, masterminds, meetings with writers, presentations of new projects, and current investigation and research work of the Pushkin Institute. The 25th Cyril and Methodius readings will be held. And of course, several events will be dedicated to the anniversary of the Alexander Pushkin since his birth. You can find an update on the program and to register for participation and to follow us online. You can follow us online, and of course we'll put a link in the text of the briefing. And yet another announcement, very important one. There is a word as an honorary mission, and this is a special task I would like to fulfill. In the Ozintsova branch of MGIMO opens today a retraining program for urban management and development and for the participants of the special military operation. The President of the Russian Federation, Vladimir Putin, was clear. The elite of Russia will be formed, first and foremost, based on the contribution of the people as to how they defend the interests of Russia at the front. These are the people who stood ready to sacrifice their lives, not to mention about welfare, when the country, fatherland, and the people ask them to do. They must become the elite. They should achieve support not only from the state authorities, but from the agencies which can and must provide such an opportunity to them. This program is implemented with the support and active organization participation of GlavUPDK. Everyone knows GlavUPDK, as well as MGIMO and the Council of Young Diplomats. 13 veterans of hostilities, heroes of special military operations, those who were born in the Donetsk Republic. They suffered combat wounds, and now they stand ready to continue serving to our fatherland as new municipal managers. This program will last 11 weeks. I'm talking about fruitful and intense work, and I saw this program. I think everyone will envy to such a training program. It is planned that the federal officials and municipal officials will lecture at this program, along with some GIMO departments heads. Moreover, there will be organized field trips to the situation centers, heating stations, Mosoblgas divisions, and some other facilities. We are not only talking about this initiative. On the day of its launch, the weeks of hard work were gone to prepare this program. We will update you on the results, and of course, the participants will share their own views after the completion of the course. I'm ready to answer your question. Is International Life with us?
Добрый день.
Hello, Ms. Zakharova. Good morning. We have several questions of you. First, how do you comment the new information about the new reconstruction phase of the Russian Foreign Ministry's main building? It is true that we've published it in our social media accounts, and it was commented by the Moscow's mayor, Sergei Sobyanin, who announced the new restoration phase and reconstruction phase of our building. It is quite a landmark building of our capital. It's a historical building. Just since we have received a lot of questions, I would like to provide some historical background. It's one of the 7 sisters, the so-called Stalin high-rise buildings. It was built in 1953, and it was designed by architects Vladimir Gelfreich and Mikhail Minkes for the Soviet Ministry of Foreign Affairs. It is a complex of structures which consists of a central multi-tier high-rise 27-story building. It has a tower and a spire. At the initial stage, there was no spire, but after the building was put into operation in 1953, it was decided to promptly build a spire, and that it was done by our builders. It has 2 wings also, and the Russian Foreign Ministry's main building is a cultural heritage site. Overhaul work started in the beginning of 2000s when the left wing was repaired. Project and repair and restoration works were carried out with regard to spire and other decorative architectural elements of facades, and these works were complete in 2017. We will add reference in the text of the briefing to the video materials, to the video reports that were issued on the restoration of the building's spire. During the work, specialists dismantled the construction of the 56-meter-long spire, and they put it back later. They also repaired decorative concrete elements in the upper parts of facades and the sculptural bas-reliefs, coat of arms of the USSR. And in December 2017, restorers received an award for the best restoration project in 2017. In December 2019, the comprehensive restoration of the right wing of the main building was complete, and over the year they have repaired facades and historical premises and a unique entrance hall with marble columns and marble staircase. In 2024, specialists will clean up facades of the central part of the building and 2 16-story wings. They plan to repair roofing, to remove and to replace the cladding of the basement and to restore the historical image of doors and windows. And they are going to reconstruct and to restore the right 16-story wing, including its interior, and the works will be complete at the end of 2030. What can you say about the statements made by some Swedish officials with regard to the so-called investigation by the Financial Times on the risks of Russian diversions in Europe? It's another pseudo-investigation by the Financial Times. It's in EU. Example of unjustified Russophobic insinuations about the omnipresent hand of Moscow, but it is new, but yet it is based on the previous insinuations. At the behest of the Zionist journalist, London is accusing our country of derailing trains in Sweden, and they make references to Western intelligence bodies. They are talking about Russian submarines, but later it turns into anything else but not submarines. And now Russia is accused of derailing trains. We are surprised by the statements made by some Swedish officials about the possible Russian involvement in the derailment of empty rail cars in the northern Swedish middle of nowhere, sorry for saying that. And such statements look especially ridiculous, taking into account chronic problems with the Swedish transportation infrastructure, regular disruptions in the work of the above-the-ground part of Stockholm subway in the winter period, frequent delays in the traffic of regional trains, as well as the high-profile case when the Arlanda Express between Stockholm and Capital Airport in May last year came off the tracks. I have a question. Is Russia involved there, or there is something wrong with the transportation system of Sweden? Instead of looking for the mythical Russian trace in the periodically occurring transportation accidents, instead of making such accusations, first, you need to develop your own economy, which also includes developing transportation. And secondly, probably you should renew the investigation of real diversions that were carried out against Nord Stream pipelines. It was an act of terrorism. It was qualified by every country. There is no country in the world who qualified it and said that it is something else than an act of terrorism. So some trains came off the tracks in the middle of nowhere in the outskirts of some Swedish cities, and they say right away that they have found the guilty. But when we're talking about an act of terrorism that caused environmental catastrophe in the Baltics and in Europe, that has undermined energy cooperation and that has resulted in global economic consequences, such acts of terrorism in the sites of Sweden does not require investigation, thorough investigation. These are double standards. This is self-humiliating revelation. They have exposed themselves in a self-humiliating way. Do you have any more questions? Yes, I have another question for you. What's your comment with regard to the remarks of British Foreign Minister in the National Cybersecurity Center? Again, since it's all being circulated and spinned out by Financial Times, we can see that there is this British features. Unfortunately, what we hear in the words of David Cameron and Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, Rishi Sunak, sorry for using such outright and words. They are just lying to their citizens, to their subjects, and they're lying every day. We're doing our best to disavow what they're saying. These are lies, and we haven't heard anything new in their statements and remarks. Again, they show the destructive policy in the bilateral affairs, and the Downing Street intends to follow the path of escalation and to increase international tensions. Why we hear alarmist attitudes? It organically fits into the desire of the ruling Conservative Party to conceal their failures in foreign policy and to make gains by escalating global confrontation in fashion of the Cold War. David Cameron wants to speak about something other than his successes. He returned to the Tories from the political oblivion, and he's trying to make the party more appealing in the eyes of the disheartened British voters, and that's why he is circulating all these made-up stories. Do you have any more questions? Ria Novosti, please. Hello, Ms. Zakharova. We have two questions for you, and the first, how can you comment protests in Georgia and Armenia, and how the United States and the European Union are responding to them? We have always strengthened that protests are an interior affair of any sovereign state. But the Western reaction is not just surprising, but it's just surprising by its stability, because it is an example of double standards, and this is the best example that demonstrates these double standards. Officials of the United States and the European Union are attacking verbally Georgian authorities for the cruel treatment of protesters. They're doing it in different ways. They're saying that the Georgian authorities and their actions are not in line with the US values, that their actions will prevent them from joining the EU. Again, they are referring to the cruel treatment of protesters. But what about Armenia? There is deafening silence with regard to the massive arrests and the brutal forces being used there to quell protests. As if the West is not interested in what's going on in Armenia and prefers to concentrate on the situation in Georgia, as if they were commanded. American and European media outlets are making reports about demonstrations in Georgia, and they are making such reports that participants and protesters are presented as heroes. In this Western mainstream media, protesters are presented as those who are acting in line with law. These reports whitewash their actions, even if these actions are taken in violation of the applicable law. And as for the protests in Armenia, they are toned down by Western media, or they presented in the Western mass media as events that do not reflect the will of the Armenian people and that are orchestrated from the outside. How is it possible that they are giving this assessment, that they are presenting the information that violates so many standards? I would like to quote the press secretary of the European Commission, Peter Stana, and Matthew Miller, the press secretary of State Department. Talking about Tbilisi, the EU official stated that we call on the government to ensure the right of people to protest. And as for the American official, he said that we condemn the use of violence against peaceful protesters. We call on authorities to help participants of peaceful actions to continue to exercise their right of free expression, but yet they say nothing about protests in Armenia. We have caught Western officials in the act in these hypocritical assessments. It's not political. It's not a selective approach. It's just how they see international affairs. And the second question, President of Moldova, Maia Sandu, gave an interview to Yuri Dut, where she admitted that over the 3.5 years in power, she failed to make success in fighting corruption and increasing the prosperity of the Moldovans and strengthening democratic values. And she was talking about the debt. I should say that two lone people met each other at the interview. This interview has turned in dozens of memes. It intended to be an election PR stunt that should have helped Maia Sandu to increase its ratings. The Moldovans were surprised, and later they were sneering and reproaching Maia Sandu for its incompetence and hypocrisy. And independent political scientists mentioned that what's important, the most important feature and the most glaring feature of this interview is that Sandu was totally unaware of any information, and she had to say that she is not aware of the details, and she needs to specify, well, what was the reason to give an interview then? She has mentioned criteria for the Moldovan diaspora to take part in elections, and she mentioned, for example, that the Moldovan diaspora cannot take part in elections if they are living in Russia. It is a key topic, and yet she wasn't ready to give any answer with regard to that. The expert community criticized the Maia Sandu speech with regard to the unbiased work of the Moldovan mass media and the absence of censorship in the country. I just recall, since 2022, the broadcasting of 13 Russian-speaking TV channels was suspended, and more than 60 internet resources were blocked. And they're going to close another 9 local TV channels and radio stations, and Maia Sandu stated that it is these media outlets are spreading massive disinformation, and they are criticizing her. That's why they should be closed and banned. These are so-called Western values that she aspires to introduce in her country. I think that this interview demonstrated the reasons why the Moldovan economy is getting worse. It's because of the political incompetence. The Moldovan export has reduced by 12.5% year-on-year basis, and import has decreased by 7.5%. The state debt has reached almost $6 billion for the country with the less than 3 million population. It is quite a substantive sum of money. At the same time, the turnover with the EU countries has decreased by $94 million. The able-bodied population continue to leave Moldova, including the youth. Moldovan sources mentioned that in 2000, 1.4 million people were working in the Moldovan economy, and according to the forecasts, in 2024, their number is going to reduce to 880,000. According to the recent social poll, 65% of Moldovan citizens see the situation in Moldova as alarming and tense, and 42% believe that this situation resembles a horror movie for them. The level of mistrust to the president has exceeded 60%, and the Moldovan experts notice that the Euro project of Sandu is associated in Moldova with poverty and lawlessness, and their current phase looks like the finale of the recent Eurovision. Sorry for mentioning it. As for the debt of Moldova to Gazprom that Maria Sandu spoke about, many of that she was speaking about was absolutely false. Just let's look at the details. The Moldovan debt to Gazprom, we have repeatedly commented on that, and we have provided a lot of details. The so-called report of audit of historical debt published by the Moldovan Energy Ministry of September 6, 2023, says that, in line with which Moldovan authorities state that there is no debt, is incompatible with international standards and with the requirements of independent audit. It cannot be viewed as an appropriate outcome document of objective financial analysis, and all the conclusions in it cannot influence and determine the size and justifiability of a debt that was confirmed in documents and by the corresponding decisions of the international courts. But Maria Sandu's opinion won't change anything with that regard. So let's continue. Is the Rush Today TV channel? Yes, hello, Ms. Zakharova. My name is Mina Milaku. I'm from RT Balkan. I have 3 questions for you. First, what is the Russian comment of the new Serbian government, whose 2 politicians are in the American blacklist? I'm sorry, could you please repeat that? What is the Russian comment on the new government of Serbia? Its 2 new politicians of the new government, Alexander Vulin and Nedad Popovic, are in the American blacklist. Yes, I understood you. Thank you. We're talking about interior affair of Serbia. Forming of a government is an interior affair of any country. The new government that was adopted on May 2nd, 2024 is the result from the free expression of will of its citizens of the elections that took place on December 17th, 2023. These appointments were made taking into account the professional expertise and business characteristics of every candidate. We hope that the new government of Serbia will continue to follow the policy that includes the further development of the Russia-Serbia strategic partnership and strengthening diverse cooperation for the sake of our peoples.
On behalf of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, we are ready to this, and I'm confident that you should not remind me of that, but just in case, maybe someone has doubts, so please don't have any doubts. Thank you. My second question. As you know, Yelena Zelenska has recently visited Belgrade along with Dmitry Kuleba. What do you think was Ukraine's plans? As you know, Serbia has not acceded to sanctions against Russia. As you know, you have several questions. What were the intentions of the Kiev regime? You can address this question to them. Someone from Kiev. It's not a question to us. As for non-accession of Belgrade to anti-Russia sanctions, this is a policy which was adopted by the National Security Council of the Republic of Serbia in February 2022. As we view it, and I think it's quite obvious, this decision is based on national interests of the country, opinion of its citizens, and on the historical experience that Serbia has. But let me underline that the Serbian leadership, by adopting these decisions concerning non-accession to sanctions, is sovereign in its path. I would like to underline what we've told on several occasions. These sanctions are illegitimate, so non-accession to them is not just a question of our strategic relations with Serbia. This is non-participation of Serbia itself in illegitimate ventures of the West. And I would like to add a couple of words. As for the context, of course, all countries are sovereign. But we need to remember that the crimes of the Kiev regime against the people of Donbass resemble the policy, the criminal policy of the Kosovo criminals against the Serbs. And I think that's the case. And I will cite facts. Black transplantology. For the first on the European continent, for the first time, these were Serbs who knew the first all the reality, not from horror movies, but from mass tombs, and this was reaffirmed and confirmed by the materials, but unfortunately no one was punished. But in memoirs by Carlo Del Ponte refers to such evidence. As for the destruction of churches and temples in Kosovo with the direct leadership of the Kosovo so-called heads, I think it resembles a lot in what is happening in Ukraine against churches, Orthodox churches, and persecutions of the Christians who preferred to follow the Orthodox Church in Ukraine. I think it resembles a lot the situation. And the discrimination of public figures who are saying all these words in public, assassinations of journalists, the lists of journalists who must be killed. I mean, the Kiev regime who must kill them. Let us remember how many journalists died during shellings of NATO on Serbia and at that time. So there were different deaths, but the journalists were targeted as well. And it goes along the same scenario right now, and we should remember that. And one more fact. I have never heard from the current authorities in Kiev, nor from his predecessors, I refer to Yatsenyuk and other heads, no words of condemnation, even to the dates of anniversaries of bombardments of NATO. I refer to the words of condemnations. I haven't heard them. And this is very telling, and we have to remember this. Thank you. We have another question. Yes, please. In 2022, Brussels introduced a ban on the broadcasting of RT Sputnik, but access to the site of RT is preserved in Europe. The West is outraged, and it was voiced at the previous briefing at the European Commission. So what is your comment on that? Thank you. This is surrealism. This is detachment from reality. Such debates in the European Commission is just mad things. If we are talking about the support of democracy, the pluralism of opinions, so how can they debate on that? How can they follow the situation when some journalists forcefully prove the officials and impose on the need to establish total information blockade against their own colleagues, when journalists, pro-Western journalists call to eliminate any undesired mass media? It's not the police structures, but the journalists themselves. And all this is happening within the premises of the European Commission, which made a lot to protect the pluralism of opinion. So such a bright example of devaluation of democratic values in such countries, basically it means the denial of such values. And if we talk about the fact that it was exactly the European Union which proclaimed the freedom of pluralism and opinions as one of its main gains, and this is the sign of declining of the same, of the EU itself. Liberalism was in fact dismantled not only by the bureaucrats but the trained mass media who were in these years were nurtured for big money to obediently follow this mainstream adopted by the political leaders. They were just trained to do so, to follow this anti-Russia campaign. They know just one thing: paid articles and their salary, grants which they receive for the articles, and some other bonuses. But the fact that the truth is suffering, they completely disregard this fact. That's why the term independent journalism, in terms of this mass media, cannot be applied. But the true causes of this fight are much more prosaic. Russia Today and Sputnik compete with the biased media in the European Union. In the European Union has a need, natural need. In fact, they are tired of the mainstream. They hear time and again. We see how the information of the Russia Today and Sputnik and other Russian mass media is being disseminated all across the globe. They are respected as suppliers of interesting, relevant, and prompt information. The coverage of the Russian listeners affects the pockets of its Western colleagues. That's why they invented how to stifle our mass media with the use of political censorship, economic indicators, and many other administrative measures. But despite this huge pressure from the Western countries and all bans and blocks, marginalization, and I'm talking about such beatings of our journalists, both directly and indirectly, when on the one hand they're just being threatened, they are being beaten, while when they broadcast, they cover such events, they are being arrested by force under false pretexts. It happens virtually as well. They are being banned. Many legends around them are being invented. They are being humiliated for their reports. They use the language against them, which cannot be used against any journalist of any country, but such language is being used towards them. They are being squeezed out in many ways. But despite these facts, they do not give up. They are aware of the fact that their activity is in high demand all across the globe, because the world needs some objective information. And following their statements, they will expand their listeners and work under these toxic and dangerous conditions. And of course, the truth will come soon, according to the endeavors of the Russian journalists and the Russian mass media. Thank you. Is Ambassador is live with us. Good afternoon, Madam Zakharova. I have a question on Serbia. The leaders of Serbia show multifaceted policy, and it shows that it's very independent in its policy, and it's ready to talk with the West and the East. And I have the question, if the Serbian leadership can do everything for both the East and say, it comes that the Russian Federation is used as cheap resources. As you know, we're developing our cooperation with Serbia on an equal, mutually beneficial footing. We have established a dialogue on various areas. We discuss a wide range of issues. So to be honest, we know our position and we implement our policy. But I've read the news. It was said that there will be held some interesting business fora of Ukraine, in Serbia. I don't know whether they are aware of economic indicators of Ukraine, whether the organizers of that business forum are aware of what Ukraine does with the people and entrepreneurship in its country. By receiving huge investments from the West, it is signing under horrible debts, and thus it betrays people whom it sends to the front. So hopefully that Ukrainian investments in the Serbian economy will become so huge, likewise the American investments. Thank you. Is Media Corporation of China with us? Yes, good afternoon, Madam Zakharova. This week, Harbina will launch the 8th Russia-China Expo in connection with the 75th anniversary of the diplomatic relations between our countries. It will be dedicated to the formation of new interaction of Russia and China and promising the question, what is the importance, in your view, of this event, taking into account that the West impedes the development of world economy? The Russian and China forum that you've mentioned, Expo, is one of the key platforms of cooperation of business community of both countries. They are being held in Yekaterinburg and in Harbin in China. So this year, this expo will be held the 8th time. It will be held especially during the visit to China. The president of Russia will visit it, and this will amplify the significance of the events that Russia and China attaches to the development of practical ties between our states. Amid dynamic growth of Russia-China trade, the entrepreneurs of both countries are very keen on participating in Expo. More than 20 regions of Russia will participate. 10 expositions of Rostech, Rosatom, and Alfa Bank will be present. We believe that such a business activity, intense economic and humanitarian exchanges, amplify healthy and full-fledged development of cooperation between our countries. The unfolding of huge potential of the Russia-China cooperation is very beneficial to both countries. So it means that any attempts of artificial impediments of our cooperation will fail. The sanction policy led by the collective West, aimed both against Russia and China, proved its failure and counterproductiveness. So in this regard, I would like to mention the opinion of the head of the International Monetary Fund, Kristalina Georgiev, who mentioned at the special session of the World Economic Forum, which held in Riyadh on the 28th and 29th of April, that over the past years, the number of trade restrictions in the world economy increased 4 times. So she admitted that this mechanism dismantles the global trade and economy in general. But these 4 times we can measure with due account to the fact that in previous decades, the number of sanctions and restrictions in trade has increased many times. Thank you. And we have a second question. About 100 fishing vessels of the so-called civil missions sent to the public organization of the Philippines on the 17th of May to Huanyang in the coastline of South China Sea. This fishery fleet will be accompanied by Manila. So how do you see this event? This is about the relations between these two states, so I don't see any point in making any comments on this trajectory. Thank you. Is Bharatak India with us?
I am here. So my question is regarding that there are many news reports in Russian about Indians in Russian army, and we have seen videos of them asking for help. So in India, there has been a few arrests regarding this, where some agents are trying to trick Indians so that they can take them to Russia. So I want to ask how many Indians are currently serving in Russian army, and also how they are recruited. Is there any government official involved who recruit tricked Indians by agents for support jobs with the Russian army? And what is the update on it? Do Russian army ask them about their consent before recruiting them or brief them about their job profile?
Вы знаете, у меня нет такой информации. Если мне
Fortunately, I don't have such information. If you send your personal contacts on this regard, but I can clarify to you. But at this stage, I do not have the information will be helpful to you. As for recruitment, as you've said, no one is engaged in this among officials. Vice versa, we call not to use diplomatic missions of Ukraine abroad to recruit mercenaries in the armed forces of Ukraine. I think they did so on a permanent basis, and were called not to do so. And you know quite well our position from these our calls. But you have some other specific information you can give to us, then I will consult with my colleagues.
Yeah, I have actually asked regarding because in India we have seen many videos of Indians who are right now serving in Russian army.
Ну, вы поймите, я не могу комментировать эти.
Just believe me, I cannot comment these videos if they are not seen by experts. We have reached the state when we have to publish anti-fakes with the videos, with the participation of the Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov, which later were created with the use of artificial intelligence and neural networks. They took a picture and use a fake audio, and voice is similar to the voice of our minister. I've seen so many things. I wouldn't like to characterize the video that you are talking about, because we need to have a look at it and provide comments later, because we cannot provide any comments without having a look at it first.
Second question is, what is the update on Vostro account deal with rupee? We have heard that Russia is investing that amount in India. Is it true? If it is true, can you please give us detail that where you are actually spending that particular amount?
Вы знаете,
You know, the investment participation is one of the crucial elements of Russia-India relations. We're successfully developing cooperation in many areas: industry, power, energy, agriculture. By the way, it is true that it is an obvious fact that the United States have been abusing dollar and have been using dollar as a political weapon. They are doing that deliberately, and they are using dollar as a hybrid warfare instrument for countries who want to pursue their own goals. And therefore, countries of the global majority, including Russia, prefer to switch in their mutual settlements to national currencies. They are doing that in order to not become another victim of the US ideology that is weaponizing dollar and using dollar as an aggressive trade war instrument, and also to avoid hegemonistic narratives of the United States. And the process of switching to national currencies is gaining momentum. We can judge it by figures and by processes. It is an irreversible process which brings together large intergovernmental and interstate associations like BRICS, Eurasian Economic Union, and many others. It was commented extensively by the Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov in his remarks, in his interviews. In the text of the briefing, we can provide a link to his comments about that. Thank you. Reuters, please. Hello, Ms. Zakharova. We can hear you loud and clear. And we have two questions. You have partially touched on that when you talked about the explosion of the residential building in Belgrade, which resulted in the deaths of 16 people. There were controversial statements according to the Russian Defense Ministry. The attack was carried out with .U missile. Work correspondents wrote that it was the high precision aviation bomb that was manufactured in the West. What Russia is going to do if it turns out that the attack was carried out with the Western munitions? You know, you are surprising me, to be honest. You want to reconstruct Lewis Carroll in the reality so that I would feel myself as Alice, that I would see the movements of rabbits from Reuters, Alice in Wonderland. What would happen if a fragment you said what would happen if the fragment of a missile was manufactured by Great Britain or another Western country? For days and for years, we have been talking about the fragments of Western-made munitions. We are demonstrating them at international platforms where experts are organizing, exhibition. I cannot put it in any other way so that you could see it for yourself. In the United Nations, in the United Nations Security Council, our permanent representative Vasily Nebenzia has been talking about it at length at the sessions on Ukraine, that this is the war that is carried out through the hands of Ukrainians, that civilians are dying of all countries, of Russia, of Ukraine, of all nationalities. And a large number of mercenaries that end up in Ukraine come from different parts of the world. And 2 years later, maybe there is some anniversary that you're celebrating today. Why today you are raising this issue? What's going to happen? How Russia is going to respond? We're responding. For 7 years, we have been observing what was going on in the Donbass, that they used everything, Western instructors against residents in Donbass, how diversions were organized against them, that the politics nearing genocide was pursued against them. They use special means, special resources provided by the West. We have been ringing the alarm everywhere. We have been advocating the Minsk agreements to prevent them. And how many protests were organized with the Western resources, with the Western-trained mercenaries and Ukrainian citizens that were trained so that they would post themselves as peaceful protesters, but in fact that they would carry out acts of sabotage against officials. We have been speaking about it for years, and we have provided every opportunity to stop that collapse, that impending collapse. I'm talking about bilateral talks, a package of agreements, Normandy format, endless negotiations of all kinds and formats. And later we moved to the protection of civilians when in January 2022, Zelensky's regime, with the support of the West and with the Western weapons, they increased shelling of the Donbass and attacks of the Donbass. We have offered every opportunity for political, diplomatic settlement, and later we started to protect the Donbass residents from destruction. Since what you're talking about Belgrade and what happened there on May 12th, and by the way, acts of terrorism that were carried out with the direct involvement of British reconnaissance bodies against our vessels, it was qualified as an act of terrorism. And the role of the West in providing information for targeting and provision of all kinds of weapons by the West. I'm just shocked, really, by your question. Why are you asking that all of a sudden? Because the world was shaken by what happened there in Belgrade, because it is fully in line with the crimes scenarios carried out by terrorist cells that were active in northern Caucasus. This is the reason why you're asking that. Or is it because we're talking about, or it looks like international terrorism that was emerged in Middle East in the form of ISIL and other terrorist groups? Terrorist acts with the use of Western weapons, it should include everything: provision of data, information, intelligence data, instructions, attacks, all of that. These attacks have been happening for many years. On May 12th, the Kiev regime has carried out a targeted and barbaric attack on the residential area of Belgrade. It cannot be qualified other than an act of terrorism. The Russian Defense Ministry stated that Ukrainian neo-Nazis used .U missile systems, Olha rocket systems, and Czech Vampire RM-70 systems. In repelling missile attacks, the Russian air defense, with the Russian air defense system, one of the fragments has hit an apartment building, which claimed lives of several civilians. And the main investigative directorate of the investigative committee of the Russian Federation has initiated criminal proceedings on Article 205 of the Russian Criminal Code, an act of terrorism. Such bloody acts of intimidation that are aimed at killing innocent people is just an open demonstration of the criminal, misanthropic essence of the Zelensky's regime and the Western patterns behind it. It is the terrorist activities that is being carried out by Kiev. The West said that terrorists in the Middle East were moderate and non-moderate, and now they qualify an act of terrorism, well, as it seems, as a right and incorrect terrorist attacks. Maybe they can qualify acts of terrorism based on their highly likely templates, moderate, less moderate acts of terrorism. It's difficult to say, but we cannot call it double standards anymore. These are crimes that are sponsored through the Western funds and that are carried out with the Western arms supplies. Ukrainian terrorism, like any terrorism, has no future, and we will do our best so that all those responsible for the preparations and perpetration of such terrorist acts against our civilians will receive inevitable punishment wherever they are. And no matter on whose support they rely on. I remember when terrorist attacks were quite frequent in the past. I wouldn't like to name these attacks, but I remember when the entire international community was shattered by these events, and I remember that Western countries did their best to find those responsible. But what those countries of the West would do, whose munitions and fragments are found in investigating this terrorist offense, it is up to them to answer that question. What are they going to do? How are they going to explain it to their population? How are they going to explain it to future generations? Because their hands are tarnished in blood. They should answer the question where taxes are going. And they should explain how are they countering terrorism by sponsoring terrorism at the same time. Quite an interesting topic, to be honest, and I think law enforcement experts and the lawyers of many countries should think and discuss when such crimes will be investigated and facts will be established and Western fragments will be identified and all those responsible will be established and the fact of the Western supplies will be established. How is going to be qualified by the Western countries? But it's up to them to answer the question. Do you have any other good questions? Yes. Thank you for this detailed answer. I would like to explain that this question about Belgrade was asked about the recent remarks by David Cameron that Ukraine could use these weapons against Russia. We have already responded to David Cameron's remarks. These are absolutely insane statements that are aimed against humanity. These are not just aggressive Russophobic remarks that have some effect of fueling conflict in Europe and in the world at large. These remarks are aimed against humanity because these remarks tramples on vision of London as a capital that respects human rights, that to some extent takes measures to counter human rights violations, that is to some extent is committed to countering terrorism. By making such remarks, David Cameron has reduced to zero all those commitments. International law, international legal commitments of Great Britain were reduced to zero by these statements. Why he made such remarks, why he said that? There are many answers. Electoral procedures, low ratings of his party, his personal ratings are quite low, and he also aspires to fuel the global crisis, taking into account the current economic situation in the United Kingdom. They're losing their resource base. They are losing their traditional ties when countries were subjugated to the will of London and to the Western countries in general. That's why he's making such statements that are fueling, escalating, and that are destroying fundamentals, legal fundamentals, human rights, fundamental principles on which the British government was built. Thank you. The second question, again, is about Ukraine, and it's about the remarks by the National Security Advisor to the President of Estonia, Madis Rol. He stated to Breaking Defense that his government considering to deploy troops in the western part of Ukraine for the logistic support of the armed forces of Ukraine, and what would be the response of Russia if such a plan is implemented, and will Russia consider them a legitimate military target? would like to say that any weapons supplied to the Nazi Kiev regime is viewed by the armed forces of Russia as a legitimate military target and will be destroyed. And the same goes for foreign mercenaries. I can't understand why are you speaking about Estonians in particular, because it applies to everyone, and I kindly ask you to give up this hidden racism. I'm not speaking to you, I'm speaking to those who are making such strange questions. Another agency, please. Two questions were raised. We have two questions for you. Do you believe that the Joe Biden warning on the suspension of American supplies to Israel in case of the full-scale military operation in Rafah will stop Israel from carrying out such operation? Such statements that Washington and Tel Aviv are exchanging with one another, it's up to them to answer such questions. We have already expressed our position on the conflict in the Middle East, and as for sending weapons to the conflict zone, this is quite a favorable method of Americans. Such methodology of the American military-industrial complex is further destabilizing various parts of the world, is fueling antagonism and terrorist activity and extremism, and it is unbalancing the religious balance. It undermines national economies and state institutions and protracts the crisis and makes its settlement illusory. There is a long list of such historical examples of how the United States have been doing that by providing weapons to the areas of conflict. Thank you. And second question, the recent visit by the Prime Minister Nikol Pashinyan to Russia, was it useful for addressing disputable issues in the Russia-Armenia relations? The comments were provided by the Yuri Ushakov from the Administrative Office of the Russian President. News.ru, please. Hello, Ms. Zakharova. News.ru greets you. So we also had a question about Armenia. It was raised by our colleagues, but we are looking at it from another point of view.
As for the meeting of the leaders of two countries, we'd like to ask you whether there are chances for to improve the relations, because the economic cooperation is still going on. And about political component, all these warming and cooling relations, that's the question to them. Russia has always advocated an allied cooperation with Armenia, and this was a historical alignment. Of course, this is a two-way street and traffic. And of course, the Minister of Foreign Affairs was very steady and consistent in his policy. All the other questions you can ask Armenia. And the second question. Right now, there are declarations that the Turkish president repeated scenario to avoid the scenario of 2016, whether Moscow will help the Turkish side, as it did in 2016 when it helped Ankara to reveal a plot against the Turkish president. I would like to say, as soon as you remind us of that case, I would like to remind you that back then it was made not in public and not to make some strong points in accordance through specialized channels. And this dialogue, we continue such a dialogue with our Turkish colleagues. Thank you. What in view is behind this coup d'etat? This information and all the related information should be commented by experts from the relevant agencies. If there is some other information, I will share it with you. Thank you. Is Lusa Portugal with us? Portugal? Is Moscow Post with us? Good afternoon. We have 3 questions. Madam Zakharova? I'm here, Lusa, Portugal, so don't be mad, I hear you. I'm sorry. We have 2 questions. Whether the recent contacts of the Russian diplomats with the African countries, in particular from the Portugal, that the Russian foreign policy is being focused on expanding influence of the Russian Federation on the African continent. We are dealing, in terms of the African continent, not to expand our influence, but to expand cooperation. Maybe someone perceive it almost the same. I don't want to dwell into some reflections, and we are focused on expanding our cooperation. The Russian Foreign Ministry, our trade and economic activities being focused on a comprehensive development of interactions of the relations with Africa based on equal footing, mutual respect, in line with the agreements reached between the heads of Russia and African states during the summits Russia-Africa, and in line with the working contents. Several days ago, at the Victory Day, the president of Guinea-Bissau visited Moscow. In Sochi, Sochi will host a ministerial conference, Sochi Africa, to which we invited some African states, Portuguese-speaking African states. This is not a kind of a response introduced by Russia, by the West. I refer to illegitimate restrictions, hybrid war of the West against our country. Just simply, we had things to offer to Africa. So this format was matured in the way as it is, and we have already held 2 summits. So this year, in several months, there will be a ministerial format that will be held in Sochi. Russia offers honest and equal partnership without politicization, without pressure, without meddlement of some other states. Our country helped a lot to the African states, and we develop our relations within this policy with Africa. Thank you very much. And my second question, how will you define the state of the Russian-Portuguese relations up to date? I cannot say a good word on this because this hybrid war waged by the West against Russia almost destroyed all the relations between Portugal and Russia due to the hostile position stance of Lisbon against Russia, which strictly followed the anti-Russia policy in all its actions. So our bilateral relations are unfortunately at the lowest phase within the whole history of its relations. Let me remind you, it was exactly the Portuguese which frozen all political contacts, economic ties are being restricted. Following the decision, Parliament Group of Friendship, Russia-Portugal was dismembered, along with some other associations. On the 20th of February 2024, the Municipal Assembly of Lisbon decided to terminate the Protocol on Friendship and Cooperation with Moscow, signed in 1997. The country is waged by anti-Russia Russophobic campaign nurtured by official mainstream. The Portuguese authorities minimized all the contacts with the embassy of Russia in Lisbon. Our ambassador was almost isolated by the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Portugal and other central agencies of the country, and we cannot understand the reason. We have a lot of issues to resolve, but this is an illegitimate anti-Russia policy led by Lisbon. Maybe it is under pressure of NATO or European Union, or it's just a anti-Russia lobby inside Portugal. So it's hard to say. I would like to underline that it's not our choice. We are persuaded that the current crisis of the Russian-Portuguese relations is not in line of the root interests of the Portuguese people. Hopefully, sooner or later, that common sense will prevail in the assessments of all the evolvements happening in the modern world, that they will soon understand the need for phased restoration of mutually beneficial and mutually respected ties with the countries. Russia has always been open with its foreign partners, including unfriendly regimes, and I'm talking about the regimes, not about the people who fell victims of these regimes. So we are open to open relations based on sovereign equality of states and respect for national interests of each other. Thank you very much. Thank you. Is Moscow Post with us? I'm sorry for interrupting. Good afternoon. We have 3 questions today. The first, Tokyo plans to propose to Washington a concept of expanded deterrence in the region of Northeast Asia, including Japan, China, and North Korea. It has also put an obligation on the United States to use its nuclear forces to deter its neighbors. So how can you comment in terms of security interests of Russia? It is hard to say that Tokyo tabled such initiatives. Of course, we are talking about the Washington strategy to use Tokyo and its other satellites as bypassers or mediators in pursuing their own interests, including the construction of the American centers, configurations aimed at pushing pressure on China, North Korea, and of course such actions challenge our national security. So China will speak for itself, and this is true. We have indicated serious risks for regional security and global stability arising from targeted actions of Washington to draw its allies from the Asia-Pacific region and this destabilizing scheme of the so-called expanded deterrence, including its nuclear component. We are concerned by the agreements reached between the United States and the Republic of Korea on nuclear planning, along with its statements on the opinion based on the nuclear weapons, as well as unconcealed intention to draw in Japan into this. In fact, they want to transfer into the Asia-Pacific a number of joint nuclear missions in an attempt to make a status of a nuclear alliance involving Washington, Seoul, and Tokyo. So all this leads and triggers conflict potential in the region, escalates tensions and arms race. And all the countries, Tokyo and South Korea, that if they are being drawn in such alliances, so they cannot control these weapons. They will be controlled themselves, along with their lives and their peoples, who will be dependent on the selfish interests of the United States. We mentioned that increased engagement of Tokyo in the military cooperation with the United States amid this policy at forced and quick remilitarization contradict the international commitments of Japan provided for the constitution of the country. We call for Tokyo to strictly comply with its nuclear-free status, with which Japan acceded to the United Nations. I'm talking about tracing the further evolution of political and military and technical cooperation in Japan and the United States in the context of additional dangers for the security of Russia. And if needed, we will adequately respond to such threats. Thank you. We have another question. How do you see the protest in the United States of the students who called to stop genocide in the Gaza Strip? And the American mass media used this protest as a pretext to ignore the Gaza Strip, and instead of discussing such protests as a threat to world order, as a sign of anti-Semitism. There is an opinion that the U.S. laws are not appealed to administration of Biden, along with international right to Israel. So, what is your assessment? It turns out that they have just one standard, and it means that they do what is beneficial to them, and they lack any absence, any standards. They do not have any morale, any honesty, any dignity. This is a dirty game they play, calling it as promotion of democracy and protection of human rights. In fact, these are just the tools they apply in their foreign aggressive policy. Thank you very much. And my last question. The head of Tavushska Church, of Armenian Church, called on the police not to use violence against protesters. Whether there will be some relevant appeals to the Republic, to the authorities of Armenia, including the Minister of Foreign Affairs. I have just answered all the questions. Is Obirek with us? Good afternoon. I have two questions. My first question concerns negotiations of Vladimir Putin and Pashinyan. It turned out that following the request, the Russian Federation withdraws its troops, but the Armenia asked the Russian border services to stay at the border with Turkey and Iran, and this was echoed by Alexander Bortnik yesterday. As far as we know, the border officials are present there in accordance with the agreement between Armenia and Russia. Does it mean that the Russian side suggested Armenia withdrawing all its troops and border officials, or whether they will stay at the border with Iran and Turkey? I see a lot of speculations with regard to the meeting held between the heads of Russia and Armenia on the 8th of May. Some reflections that the Russian side allegedly offered to completely withdraw its troops from the territory of Armenia. That's not true. Some other resources says that such withdrawal is held in line with the agreement of Armenia and Baku. All these are speculations. The reality is that during negotiations between the leaders and Armenia, upon the request of Armenia, withdrawal of Russian customs officers, border officers were discussed from border regions in accordance with the tasks set forth before them earlier. And all the comments were provided by Yuri Ushakov. And my second question. A few days ago, Azerbaijan dismantled some monuments to the heroes of the Great Patriotic War. On the 14th of April, during the briefing, there was another question. You said that the Russian side will raise this issue with Azerbaijan and discuss it. The destruction of this monument. I would like to know whether these discussions took place. As you know, in our contacts with both sides, we raise this issue. So please be aware that we remember all these desecrations of monuments are completely inadmissible, especially in terms of Armeno-Azerbaijani reconciliation. We call on Baku and Yerevan to preserve the cultural heritage. This is a devotion to the history of our ancestors. This is the shaping of the environment to establish trust and mutual confidence, and so without which the peace is impossible in that regions. So we have a trustful dialogue with both capitals in this regard. Thank you. It would be great if you were very attentive and use your information resources to bring attention to fight against destruction of monuments in other parts of the world. This is not just the monuments. Soldiers are being buried there, and representatives of Armenia are there too. So far, Russia is fighting alone against this abuse. So please use your resources and bring attention of the public to these facts. While we're defending our monuments in Poland, Bulgaria, in Austria, and some other parts of the world where they are desecrated, this is not just the Russian soldier is lying in the tomb. It has soldiers from all nationalities and confessions and religions. Recently, I had a conversation with a soldier of the special military operation. He was from Nicosia. And we talked about nationalities. And he said, as you know, and I quote him directly, it's about the current times and about the past. As you know, when you share the bread in the trench, so everyone becomes brothers and sisters without any division into nationalities. And then when we talk about dismantlement of monuments and desecration of tombs of the heroes of the Great Patriotic War in the Western Europe, so please ask this question. What, for example, the representatives of your question do in order to stand with us and protect these monuments? Thank you. Let's move on. Is Vesti Kavkaza with us? Good afternoon, Madam Vladimirovna, Madam Zakharova. What is Russia's assessment of the new round of peaceful negotiations between Azerbaijan and Armenia? And what's the attitude of including Kazakhstan to these peace negotiations? We welcome the negotiations of the Minister of Foreign Affairs. This is another step to achieve sustainable peace and prosperity in the South Caucasus. We maintain efforts of Kazakhstan in this direction. We are ready to support our partners. It is important that these contacts are in line with the bilateral agreements of the leaders of Armenia and Azerbaijan. In order to lead to the normalization of relations.
Greater Asia, yes, please. Hello? Yes, we have one question. May 12th, Maxim Reshetnikov reported that this year they plan to sign an updated agreement on the promotion and protection of capital with China, Indonesia, United Arab Emirates, and Mongolia. We understand that the goal of such agreements is to stimulate bilateral investments as a significant part of economical activities of our countries. Can such agreements be viewed as a platform for economic cooperation and as an opportunity for promoting political and diplomatic relations with the countries of Asia? Updating agreements regulating and governing investment cooperations with these countries are aimed at promoting foreign economic interests of the Russian Federation. I mean by that reorienting exports and capital inflows and increasing our investments in Asia, Africa, Latin America, creating transportation and logistic, payment and insurance infrastructure in the conditions of a global crisis of trust stimulated by the Western countries, which resulted in the destruction of traditional economic ties. It is important for us to develop sustainable cooperation mechanisms that are based on mutually respectful, mutually beneficial cooperation. Such work will strengthen political and diplomatic relations with a wide range of interested countries. And if you allow, Voice of Fatherland, please, the floor is yours. Hello, Ms. Zakharova. At the entrance of the Russian Foreign Ministry, there are meetings organized by the National Liberation Movement. What's your opinion about that? And do you believe that such initiatives and meetings should take place all over the country? I think we need to divide the functionality. In line with the Russian law, the civil society in Russia has a right to implement its initiatives. We can only welcome any patriotic initiative, but as for implementation, it comes to civil society, civil figures, non-profit organizations. I would like to highlight just one thing. You should do that in line with the applicable law. Is Russia interested in restoring the land within the borders following 1945? I have repeatedly answered that question. Is Russia interested in that? I have already provided my answer to your question about raising such questions at the official briefings of the Russian Foreign Ministry. I think you can organize a round table about that and we can have a discussion about it. Do you have any other questions? What's the reason of the absence of polling station for the presidential elections in Georgia? In line with the Russian law, polling stations abroad are traditionally created on the premises of the diplomatic missions and consulates. As you know, there is diplomatic relations between Georgia and Russia are almost absent, and Russian interests are represented at the Swiss embassy in Georgia. So organization of the polling station for presidential elections was impossible. So an opportunity was provided in adjacent countries, in Armenia, in Gyumri, in Turkey, in Consulate General in Trabzon. Our compatriots and Russian citizens were informed about that in advance. Thank you very much. And that's the end of our briefing. See you next time. And I wish you well. Thank you.